Good afternoon, and welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Friends Lecture Series. My name is Barbara Proschel, and I'm president of the Friends of the Institute. So thank you for joining us today to hear our guest speaker, Professor William Barnes. He will share his research on the art of ancient Mexico with a focus on Central American sculpture and Mesoamerican manuscript painting. And maybe he'll also tell us why he prefers to go by Andy Barnes. But first, a word from our sponsor. This lecture is presented by the Friends of the Institute and made possible with generous support from the Mark and Mary Goff Fitterman Fund. Please note up on the screen some upcoming Friends events, our discussion and tours on the 21st and 22nd on an interestingly titled book, When Women Were Dragons. And then April 10th is our lecture by Megan Emery. She's a senior conservator at the Midwest Art Conservation Center, which is actually just below us in the basement of this building. And that will be preceded by tours, and then directly after we'll have the Friends Spring Luncheon. So I hope you can join us then. And speaking of spring, I hope you've blocked your calendars for Art in Bloom. It's our 41st annual Art in Bloom. And what a way to celebrate spring with the joy and beauty of art and flowers. On the evening of the 25th, that's a Friday, we'll have the gala, appropriately called Party in Bloom. And this year, it will have a very fun Latin flair. Just some housekeeping, well, one housekeeping item. Please wait for the microphone to be passed to you during the question and answer period. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Valeria Piccoli, who will in turn introduce Professor Barnes. Valeria Piccoli is a Ken and Linda Cutler Chair of the Department of the Arts of the Americas and Curator of Latin American Art. She joined MIA in the fall of 2022. And then I was asked not to say much more about her because she wants to give the stage to our guest speaker. So with that, help me welcome Valeria to the stage.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in this surprisingly warm and sunny Sunday. I'm very honored to introduce you to Professor William Barnes, who is an associate professor of art history at the University of St. Thomas, where he arrived in 2009. Before that, he had spent time teaching about the arts of the ancient Americas at the Saginaw Valley State University, the San Diego State University, and at Tulane University in New Orleans. Dr. Barnes holds a BA in art history from Arizona State University and earned a master's degree in art history and in a PhD in interdisciplinary art history and archaeology, also from Tulane University. His 2009 dissertation was entitled Icons of the Empire, the Art and History of Aztec Royal Presentation, and addressed the small body of works that both depict and, well, I'll pause because, I mean, this word, it's a mouthful for a Brazilian. Hieroglyphically, I hope I said it right, name Aztec rulers. It was during his dissertation work that he became more and more interested in the complex interworking of the ancient Mexican calendar that is still the focus of his work today. He has published a number of articles that address what he has called Aztec calendrical rhetoric in edited volumes published by Harvard University Press, Oxford University Press, the Middle American Research Institute, and Dumbarton Oaks. His most recent studies address the process by which Aztec royal imagery was developed over time and the way in which the artists of the so-called Aztec Calendar Stone tried to meld together the Aztec mythic history of the cosmos and with the personal history of the last pre-Hispanic Aztec ruler, Montezuma II. So please join me in welcoming Professor Barnes.
Welcome, and thank you. Thank you, Valeria, for that introduction, and Barbara and the friends, and thank you to Mia for inviting me here on this beautiful day. Thank you all for coming, and let's get started. I brought in quite a few images for y'all today, and I'll see how far we can get here. But excuse me, I'm on the tail end of a horrible cold, and I'll try not to cough over everyone. But when I was putting this together and I was talking to Catherine, I forgot to say thank you to you as well, about what the coverage should be or what would work, and talking with Valeria about it as well, I thought, well, let's sort of expand this and let's see if we can bring in more things from the Mia collection into the talk. So the scope has been expanded a little bit into the ancient cultures of India and South America as well. The title, Who's in Charge, comes from my own interest in how it actually is that artists of the past went about setting up systems, visual systems, by which they could communicate authority. And authority is an interesting thing, especially when we're talking about visual representations of authority, because we don't tend to question things that we see and recognize as a legitimate symbol of authority or something that brings to mind the legitimate basis for authority. What we tend to do is perseverate on the lack or the absence or the inversion of what we usually are culturally conditioned understandings of authority, what we think it is. And so when it's not there or when it's done a little bit wrong, we tend to recognize it. And that's the way that it usually works. And it's the way that it works in a lot of other cultures as well. And what we end up seeing, especially in a lot of the objects that I'll be showing you here that were recovered archaeologically, what we end up seeing in these objects are little glimpses of the ideological systems that existed in these cultures that led to the development of these authoritative systems, especially in Mesoamerica and the Andes that I'll be talking about, especially in the major cultural centers of places like Tenochtitlan of the Aztecs or Cuzco of the Inca. So I grabbed a few pictures while I was prepping for things, pictures that I thought sort of might be immediately understandable as images that have to do with perceptions of authority. And on the left, we see what I think most people would accept as a legitimate kind of statement of authority. And all of us, all the things, right? It has luxurious materials. It has incredible workmanship that talk of a long craft tradition and a society that can maintain specialists in some fairly obscure areas of artistic expertise, be it working with cloth of gold or gold thread for embroidery, the carving of monuments, the crafting of jewelry, the process of getting a perm. All of these things kind of, they speak to us. When we see those perms, we're like, that's power. That's power there. Nice gams, by the way. Very proud of his legs, Louis XIV. But when we have these symbols of power and they become sort of set, they become codified, they're conventionalized, there is the ability to then tinker with them, to play around with them. And we see this in parodies, where some of that same visual vocabulary that screams power and the Rigaud painting is sort of flipped around in a Nast cartoon, poking fun at Andrew Jackson. And the other day, I had a friend send me a photograph of a news conference in the White House that seemed to be causing quite a stir. And I was listening to the language that people were using when discussing this photograph and this event that's over on the right over there. And overwhelmingly, people were discussing sort of how this was unseemly and how it was weird, and saying things like President Musk out there. And it made me realize that the reason that people were getting so bent out of shape about all of this is because it was an inversion of their expectations of what a representation of power should be. And so what I want to do tonight, or this afternoon, I suppose, is say a little bit about what these kind of visual systems looked like in the ancient Americas. And the two regions that I'll be focusing in here is the archaeological region that we refer to as Mesoamerica over here. It's a culture area name. It's not really a geographical name. It has geographical components to it. But it refers to an area where there were a lot of different people that had very closely tied cultural traits. And there's usually 7 cultural traits for Mesoamerica, including writing and the creation of books and the ball game that was common in the region, that all tied these people together, even though there was a wide variety of different languages and different cultures in the area. The other place that we'll be heading is the heartland of Andean ancient culture in northern Peru, on the north coast of Peru in particular, in South America. And this is the area where the Incas and their ancestors are located. So just to give you a little idea of the time depth, and I'll barrage you with these overly complex graphs here, and that's part of my trademark out there. But to give you an idea of the time depth that we're dealing with here, we start seeing, at least in Mesoamerica, aspects of really complex culture, monumental sculpture, monumental architecture, and the pre-classic amongst the Olmec, of the Gulf Coast of Mexico. The 3 cultures that I'll be really highlighting here, because they relate to some of the objects that are in the collection at MIA, are the Olmec, the Maya, and the Aztecs, who were the latest and greatest. I'm an Aztecista myself, so the latest and greatest in the history of cultures. It was the Aztecs and the Aztec ruler Moctezuma II who ended up running into Hernan Cortez during his exploits in the region that led up to the Aztec-Spanish War, also sometimes referred to as the Conquest. In South America, as I mentioned, we'll mostly be looking at things up upon the north coast. And this is an area that is rather rough. It starts at the coast with one of the driest deserts in the world. I think it's the 2nd driest after Antarctica, the Atacama Desert, and a sharp increase up into the Andes Mountains that are sliced through with river valleys and highland areas where pastoralists could herd llamas and alpacas and vicuñas and farm potatoes, other root crops and staples of the Andean diet. I didn't delete all the cultures that I had put up there, but some of the things that I brought in for you today are some objects related to the Moche culture, the Mochica culture, that occupied a number of different river valleys on the coast. I had to bring in Chimú to talk about at least a few objects from Chimú because of our wonderful golden ear spools that we have in our collection that are quite popular among visitors. And last, I'll bring in some Inca material. And the Inca, this is too small of a circle for them, but if I would have put it to the extent of the Inca Empire, it would have covered up all these other cultures that I'd put up there. So that's kind of the nuclear zone for Inca culture. So when I show you some of these objects, those of you, and especially those familiar with art historical practices out there, might recognize some of the tricks and tropes that artists are using with these pieces in terms of communicating sort of high status and value. Of course, precious materials are a big part of that, with gold, and gold sort of equivalent in Mesoamerica was also greenstone, and both in Mesoamerican and in the Andes, gold was associated with the sun in various ways, where greenstone, particularly in Mesoamerica, was associated with sort of the principle of life and renewal, agricultural renewal, but it's not just agricultural renewal, it's more along this philosophical premise of the renewal of life and life-giving essence. But these were incredibly valuable material. Jade was worth its weight in gold out there. We know about hierarchical perspective and hierarchical scale. This is where the bigger a person is in a work of art, the more important they are. And so here in this Maya sculpture, this Maya panel from Piedras Negras in Mexico, this is, I think, lintel 2 or panel 2. And it shows the Lord of Piedras Negras that you guys probably could have figured out without me telling you. He's the biggest there. He also has the biggest hat, which is very important. And he's bestowing titles to junior lords that are subservient to him in there. And then, of course, metaphorical substitution is a little bit of the Swiss Army knife of iconography when we move into the ancient Americas. And I'm showing you on the right over here the front and back of a Moche pot from South America that shows a puma who's feasting on a war captive. And we know he's a war captive because he's wearing what we call a captive collar. And this was very commonly shown in Moche art as a little tie around the neck. And you can see the strap of that tie that goes down the back of the figure and is used to bind his hands behind him. We'll see this a lot, and I particularly like this captive's collar when the strap for it is in the front and it looks like a businessman's tie on there. And I think many people might consider that a prisoner's collar even today. So a couple of definitions up here, because when we're talking about authority, what we're really talking about is the manifestation of ideology. Because no one is born with authority. Authority is taken or it's granted, or there's usually a combination of the two that are involved in there. And where social scientists, anthropologists, art historians, archaeologists as well have known for quite a while that if we're going to be talking about authority, and particularly in relation to how one enforces authority, that the force of arms or the threat of force of arms is a legitimate tool, but it is not a successful tool when used in and of itself, and there has to be something else to get people to buy into the system. And this is where ideology comes in. So when we look at the shot here that I took outside of Cuzco at the great, well, it's sometimes called a fortress, but it was never really a fortress. The only people that ever used it as a fortress were the Spanish during the siege of Cuzco when the Inca almost drove them out. It's a great sacred enclosure that covers acres on top of the great hill of Sacsayhuaman. These massive stones, the Cyclopean masonry, all fitted without mortar, is something that, a bunch of bros didn't do this on a weekend with a six-pack of beer. There was someone who was in charge, and there was someone who was planning and guiding and ensuring the supply chain was in place. Excuse me. Ensuring that there was a skilled enough workforce to be able to do these types of things. And so this is sort of that concrete manifestation of authority to move beyond kind of the philosophical definitions and terms that I've thrown up there. I thought I'd start by saying a couple of things about my own journey towards the investigations of authority in the ancient Americas. And I'm showing here a couple of works that are related to the Mexica, or the Aztecs, as they're more commonly called. These are two things. One, a sculpture that's in the Smithsonian collection. This was a picture that I took over in their storage area in Suitland, Maryland. And it is an Aztec deity who was part of, well, he was one of the deities who was honored in the state cults and state-run festivals in the Imperial Center in Tenochtitlan, even though he was known as a foreign god who had been adopted from different lands. But I can't go too far down that rabbit hole, or we'll still be here next Thursday. But he was an interesting fellow because he wears flayed skins. And I bumped into this guy when I was an undergrad at Arizona State. And we had to take a graduate level course as an undergrad in order to qualify for graduation. And I ended up lucking into a class that was on the Aztecs. And in that class, I came across this image on the left over here, which is from a pre-Hispanic style manuscript. That means that it is done in a purely pre-Columbian style, but it was done in the first years after the European arrival, and it was actually painted by Mexica or Nahua artist, former Aztecs, and it was painted to illustrate something to the Europeans that were there to kind of inform them. And they took it, and at least one Spaniard took it and actually added the alphabetical annotations that you see in there. Books like this were very common. There were probably tens of thousands of them throughout Mesoamerica. They were made of amac paper, a native fig tree that's bark was used to make paper. And they're also sometimes made of a type of vellum deer skin rather than sheepskin out there. That would usually be sized and painted. And the scene that I'm showing you here is actually part of a calendar page. And I explain this to my students as essentially a page from a spreadsheet that is actually walking you through, in this case, a 13-day period. And the days are listed down here, the first part of the 13-day period, and the other ones are listed up there. We have the gods that are responsible for the daytime hours and the nighttime hours, the volatiles that could be consulted for auguries on these particular days. And in the large cell that is kind of inset into this here, we have the patron deity of this particular period of time. And this is a version of Xipe Totec. And when I saw this as a young kid, it was weird. It was also visually so appealing. And I was explaining to some of the Friends Committee that I was at dinner with last night that initially when I got into art history, I thought I was going to study stained glass windows. And you can see where my affinity for Gothic stained glass windows was actually, there was a bit of satisfaction that I got from looking at these with the strong dark form lines and the broad fields of color that fill out these figures. And so I wrote a research paper on this, and it wasn't very good. But eventually, when I landed down in New Orleans and I started sort of having to come up with a thesis topic out there, I remembered that in my research I'd come across a couple of pages, and these pages were really interesting, and they showed two Aztec rulers. This is the second Montezuma who is here, And this is actually his father, whose name was Ahuitzotl, or Waterface, over here on the right, wearing the costume of Xipe Totec whilst in the midst of a conquest. And the page on the left is from the Codex Vaticanus A Rios, that's Vaticanus A 3775, for those of you taking notes. Or is it 3773? Vaticanus A. No, 3775 is the Vaticanus B. You would think it's the Vatican. You'd think they could come up with different names. But the other one is the Codex Coscatzin that's still in Mexico today. But this got me thinking about, as I was writing my thesis that was about depictions of Xipe in pre-Columbian style manuscripts, it got me thinking about what it means to see a ruler who's actually dressed in the guise of a deity. And that started me down my pathway for my dissertation. And still, as you can see from my choice of topics today, something that interests me quite a bit. So for my dissertation, I said, well, let's go find all the images that we can that were made in the pre-Hispanic period for the arrival of the Europeans, before 1519, at least for the Aztecs. All the depictions that we can find where an Aztec ruler is depicted along with their name glyph. And I launched into it thinking that I would be in trouble and that there would be so many different examples of this. And this is it. This is all we see. Like the manuscripts where I mentioned there were probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands in them, we're down to today about 12 surviving manuscripts and fragments of manuscripts that are known in the world. There may still be a few hiding around out there, or in a vault in Switzerland or something. Hopefully they'll pop up soon. But in terms of those Aztec royal objects that had depictions and names of rulers, there weren't very many. And when we do see them, they're a little bit unusual. The only one that we might recognize as meeting our expectations of what to see for a depiction of a ruler is this one here. And this is a drawing of a scene from this. It's the Tizoc stone that's in the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. And this is Tizoc's name right here, this little leg that is behind them. Originally it would have had little puncture wounds in it. His name is a variation on, well, I'm going too far into this, stuck leg, meaning that you pierced leg. The Aztecs practiced human sacrifice. They're quite famous for that. What most people don't know is the principal form of human sacrifice that took place in ancient Mesoamerica was autosacrifice, and that was the letting of one's own blood. It was a necessary rite of all rulers. It happened at the time of their elevation. They spent days in seclusion, fasting, meditating, letting their own blood. And they did this in recompense to the gods, and I'll say more on that in just a little bit here. But one thing that I found in looking at these, in that this is kind of a unitary image. Most of the other images that we have of these Aztec rulers shows them in the process of performing ritual, and it's usually that bloodletting ritual. And these two fellows right here are poking their ears with bone awls, and the blood is flowing from their ears down in front of them and down here into the mouth of the earth that is down below them. And it got me thinking of why then would these guys wear the Xipe costume? Why would they sort of have themselves depicted as almost like priests rather than these militaristic rulers? And here's an example of one of these. This is the famous Teocalli of Sacred Warfare, or Temple of Sacred Warfare. It's a name given to it soon after its recovery back in 1921, right next to the National Palace in Mexico City. It's famous today for being one of the few pre-Hispanic or Aztec-style sculptures that has the depiction of the eagle on the prickly pear cactus that still today sits at the center of the flag of Mexico. There's not very many pre-Columbian depictions of this. There's quite a few in the early colonial period, however. On the front of it, though, on the upper portion, the entire monument is a small model of a pyramid with kind of a banner up on the back that looks a bit like a backrest, but was probably supposed to bring to mind the rectangular sacrificial stones used by the Aztecs. But it shows the ruler who commissioned this, and that is Moche II, who was, again, the Aztec ruler who ended up being murdered by Cortez in 1519, 1520. We're not sure. The sources aren't entirely reliable about some of this stuff that went on. But he is standing on either side, well, he's standing on one side of the solar disk that has in its middle the hieroglyphic name of the sun that is for movement. And across from him here is the patron deity of the Aztecs. His name is Ahuitzotl, hummingbird on the left, and he usually appears wearing a little hummingbird headdress. And we think hummingbirds don't sound very tough. But you've obviously never seen hummingbirds fight. And the ideal warrior in an Aztec society could move like one of those hummingbirds, blurring with their speed, with their sharp attack, and with their viciousness, even though they are terribly cute. The tutelary god and the ruler are standing here, and they are exhorting people, these are their speech scrolls here, exhorting the populace to perform auto-sacrifice for the benefit of the sun. And in their hands, they hold the little spines that one would use to pierce the skin. Why were they doing this? And I said I would come back to it. They were doing it because there was a debt owed to the gods. We have a few recorded accounts of creation stories by the Mexica, by the Aztecs. And they tell the story of a time when the gods decided that it was, as gods are wont to do, they decided that they needed to create a world and people it with individuals who could then worship them. A little bit of an ego. But the gods created a world, and it took a little practice to get it right. There were actually 4 previous creations before this one, and each one ended in disaster because the so-called people, or the versions of people that lived in those worlds, they weren't meeting the expectations of the gods in terms of their ritual obligations and their concern for the continuation of the cycle that the gods had set into place. And so after the 4th and penultimate creation was destroyed, the gods gathered together, and traditionally this is said to have happened at the ancient archaeological site of Teotihuacan. That's about 25 miles northeast of Mexico City, probably about 20 miles northeast of Mexico City today. It grows a lot. It might be 18 miles by the time I finish this sentence. But at Teotihuacan, the gods gathered together in darkness, and they said, all right, let's get going. And in order to create a new era, there needed to be a new sun, and there needed to be a new earth, and there needed to be new inhabitants for it. And the way that one could create this new sun was to sacrifice themselves. Again, auto-sacrifice. But these are gods. Gods don't do things by half measures. And so it was the sacrifice of the gods, their own self-sacrifice, their own deaths, that led to the creation of the current era, the birth of the sun and the moon, and the will that put all of it into motion and created the 5th creation. And this was done in a couple of ways, and I'm showing you here a couple of other pages from that Codex Borbonicus. And these are showing or illustrating Aztec festivals that happened during the course of the calendar year. The 365-day calendar was broken up into 18, 20-day sort of months. And at the end of each one of these months, there was a grand festival celebrating a god or a series of gods who were part of the state cult. So the scene that I'm showing you over here is from the last month of the year, Titi. And as the year is ending and in the darkness of, the time of the winter solstice out there, we see another assembly of all the gods. Wait, you say, I thought the gods were dead. Well, they are. These are people wearing the costumes of the gods. And the Aztecs would have told you this because since the gods had sacrificed themselves to give birth to our creation, they can only sort of come back down to earth in spirit, and if they're given a proper receptacle to be housed within. And so the process of deity impersonation, as it's called in the literature, was a major component of Aztec religion. People would be chosen to host the god for a certain period of time, sometimes a year, sometimes weeks. They would be treated as a living embodiment of the god, and at the end of their term of service, they would usually be sacrificed in order to go and then dwell, at least their spirit, to dwell in the house of the god that they had served. The festival that I'm showing you on the left over here is one of the more significant calendrical festivals in Aztec Mexico that takes place once every 52 years when they reach the end of their calendrical system. In Aztec, central Mexico, and in other parts of Mexico, there was a 52-year cycle where no dates repeated, in a sense, for 52 years. So you have sort of these two calendars going that give a serial number to every single day, over 18,000 of them, in a 52-year period. And at the end of that period, the gods would again appear in the guise of their impersonators. They would approach a temple where a great festival was held in imitation of that great bonfire that gave birth to the current creation. And they would burn bundles of reeds that represented the past century. And it's a bit of a clean start. Everyone would break all the dishes in their house. They would break all of the idols or deity images that they had in their house, made of clay for the most part. And you would start fresh again for this next 52-year cycle. That was kind of equivalent in Mesoamerica to our thoughts of the century and living to see the extent of the century. I'll give you a quick peek into one of the articles that I just sent off not too long ago, where I dig back into this sculpture that no one's ever heard of. Someday maybe people will learn something about the Aztec Calendar Stone. Well, people have been writing about it for about 3 centuries now, actually, so it's a bit of hubris for me to think that I have something new to say. But in my work, and first of all, I should mention it's not an actual calendar. It has calendrical information on it, but it's actually formatted in such a way as to confound anyone who tries to use it to actually reckon any calendrical information. It is a statement of time, and it is a warning about the coming apocalypse if people just don't do the right rituals and do them properly and in time and with their full heart. It comes the end. And so this is sort of a dire warning about the end of an era. But it also has couched within it some interesting little glyphs. These down here, these get a little bit of press, but these in particular don't get much press out there. And in trying to figure out why they're here, I make an argument in my work that they were intended to tie together the story of the life of Montezuma II, or Moctezuma II, and the idea of this great creationary cycle of the birth of the sun and the trials and tribulations that went on to create it. So melding together kind of the mythic story of creation in the cosmos with a much more local story of the ruler of the polity. I do it, and all my colleagues say, don't show charts in your presentations. which always flares my oppositional defiance disorder. So here's a chart out there. Not going to say too much about it, but I did want to point out a couple things on here. This is a particular year in that 52-year cycle. This is year 26. It's the midpoint in the cycle, and midpoints were very dangerous in special times. And this is the traditional birth year of the sun, the current sun. It was born in the year 13 Reed. And its birthday falls twice in this year. It gets too complicated to explain it. But, well, I can explain it, but in the time that I have here, I wanted to note this little section here that's outlined in blue that is actually a reference to important ritual events in the life of Montezuma. This sort of cycle shifts around, but in the different years that are mentioned on the stone are well, linked to the life of Montezuma, the year of his birth, that was 1 Reed, the year that he entered into ceremonialism as a 15-year-old child, someone who had reached the age of majority, adulthood, at 15, and that was actually in the year 13 Reed, and these would have been probably Montezuma's first festivals, something to put in the baby book. And the other years that are kind of alluded to in this are the coming new fire ceremony that Montezuma would preside over in 1507, and his 52-year birthday that would be coming up in the year 1 Reed 1519. The party was interrupted by the arrival of Europeans who showed up on the 52nd birthday of Montezuma. The concern, though, with the sun and paying one's blood debt to the sun is pervasive throughout most Aztec art. And I show you over here on the right, this is our one Aztec piece that we have in the Mia. So I have to give her some screen time up here. This is a goddess. This is the Aztec goddess of terrestrial water. Her name is Chalchiuhtlicue. And Chalchiuhtlicue, and I've parsed her name down here, and this is Nahuatl, the language that was spoken by the Aztecs. Chalchiuhtlicue means jade or green stone or precious stone out there. It's jade in this particular instance. E is the third person possessive pronoun, there. The Aztecs in Nahuatl, they don't have gendered pronouns. There's only they, their, and them out there. The only thing they really differentiated in all that much was between things that were animate and things that were inanimate. So jade, their skirt, queit, is the thing that's possessed, the skirt down here. And it's referencing the skirt that she's wearing here. And I think Minnesotans don't have a hard time sort of understanding how the goddess of terrestrial waters might have a jade-colored skirt, because I know in my time that I've been in Minnesota, the lakes and the ponds around here, particularly in the height of the summer months, oftentimes do turn to a wonderful shade of jade out there. And this is the kinning, this poetical metaphor that's being used in her name to reference her, her domain of terrestrial waters. This jade skirt that flounces out around her. Why am I mentioning her? Well, because I have a sculpture of another Aztec ruler here. This is Montezuma's uncle, who was his immediate predecessor. And this was a monument that was carved to celebrate the dedication of a new aqueduct in 1499. This aqueduct brought water down from a spring in the city of Coyoacan into the center of Tenochtitlan that was an island city that was situated in a semi-brackish lake. And so getting fresh water into the city was a big deal. When Ahuitzotl, whose name is Water Beast, and his name glyph is right up here, it's a little possum-like animal that has a long tail with a hand at the end, and they swim up underwater when you're out there, kind of like at the beginning of the movie Jaws. When you're swimming in the water, he'll come up under you, he'll grab you with that little prehensile tail, and he'll pull you down underwater to never be seen again. So Ahuitzotl commissioned this aqueduct on the 52nd anniversary of his grandfather's dedication of the great temple of Tenochtitlan, Montezuma I's renovation of that had happened 52 years before this. So he had to get in on it and have his own monument, and he put his image on both sides of the monument. This is the same stone. These are the front and the back of it that I'm showing you here. And it shows the ruler. Here's a smaller version of his name glyph here. And here he is performing autosacrifice. He actually has a sharpened jaguar bone that he's using to pierce the upper portion of his ear to let blood. Why am I showing you this in relation to Chalchiuhtlicue? Well, it's because he's actually wearing the costume of the goddess, especially in the front section that's heavily abraded. This was another one that was just found in the 20th century. And a priest of Chalchiuhtlicue is the costume that he is wearing down here. And he's doing this because in this particular year, and the year is right here in this cartouche, it's the year 7 Reed, that's 1499. This is a year where the festival of the sun, the one that is celebrated on the name day or the birthday of the sun, that would also be its death day, by the way, it falls in months in that calendar that I showed you that are dedicated to the rain gods. So he is doubling down here on stressing his connection to the divine, because there is this order of authority that descends from heaven, and one's access to those supernaturals in heaven above are what are quite significant for that. And we have a long history of this, and we see a long history of this in ancient Mesoamerica, stretching back to the time of the Olmec. And I have our little Olmec mask that is showing up over here. And these features were used to talk about one's connection to the supernatural and to the magical realms up above. Right, let me see. I'm chatting too long about many of these things. I'll skip ahead a little bit here because I want to throw in some of our Maya objects at MIA. And the Maya had an equally important concern with the with the basis of authority and the solar cycle. The diagram that I made on the left over here is something that I oftentimes refer to as a Mesoamerican compass, where there's 5 directions rather than 4. There's the ones we recognize, north, south, east, and west, but it's the center that is the most significant of that, and it has a vertical dimension that goes up into the heavens and down into the underworld below. And it is this, this central axis that can shift depending on where you are and who is actually considered to be the most important person, because that central axis can be a place, it can be a person, and of course the people, and we all know people out there who think that they are the center of the cosmos, but a lot of the arguments that are made are that yes, these rulers are the center of the cosmos, and they are oftentimes treated metaphorically as an embodiment of the sun. And the objects that I'm showing you here that are in the MIA collection include a little stone sculpture down here of a jaguar deity that we sometimes refer to as the jaguar god of the underworld, the JGU, who symbolizes the sun in its nightly transit through the underworld, because when it's noontime here, it's midnight in the underworld, and when it's midnight here, it's noon in the underworld. And the lords of the underworld are notoriously shifty when it comes to letting people leave. It's not really in their job description to let people leave out there, and this even includes the sun. And so when the sun rises in the east every morning, It is a celebration of the victory of the sun over those tricky and wily gods of the underworld. So the jaguar god of the underworld is a reminder of the fact that the sun each night faces peril, and that it will rise in the morning is oftentimes referred to with a depiction of a young maize god, and that is who's at the center of this plate, probably one of the hero twins in the guise of a young maize god. When we see the lidded pot that's actually on display over in Gallery 260 right now, there is both maize imagery and jaguar god of the underworld imagery on it. And so the sense here is that it is a liminal sort of place that's being discussed, these places of transition between life and death and life. And keeping in mind that the vast majority of objects like this come out of people's tombs, much like the art of Egypt, where people think they were obsessed with death, it's like, well, they were concerned with it, we all are. But most of the stuff that we have in collections around the world come from tombs. So it would be like somebody who sees that I only save birthday cards saying, wow, this guy was obsessed with birthdays. And it's like, no, I just save those are the only cards I save. So I've got a couple of minutes here, and I wanted to address some of Andean South America to bring in some of the objects in our collection. And one of the bases of authority in the Andes was your relationship to those who had sort of more status than you by the nature of their birth and by the nature of their affiliation in their clan. This was called an aiju, and it could be traced back to an original lineage founder, an important ancestor, but it could also be non-specific objects out there, like a mountain, or a sacred bundle, or a particularly important spring, or something along those lines. And that would be your clan founder. And that was in the far, far distant past, in mythic memory. Soon after the founding, there's usually a split that happens between these different clans. And that split, anthropologists refer to as a moiety division. And usually within these moieties that are comprised of separate but complementary halves, there are associations with each half. And in Quechua, the language of the Inca, those are referred to as Anan and Urin. Anan being the upper and Urin being the lower, or perhaps one being the left and one being the right. So for example, the sun is Anan and the moon is Urin. So daytime is Anan and nighttime is Urin. The sun is warm and hot, and so heat and warmth is Anan. The moon is at night and cold and misty, so darkness and mist and moisture is Urin. We can see that in this particular necklace that I brought in from the Moche side of Sipan. It's made up of, these are peanuts, by the way, but these are gold and silver peanuts with the Anan half and the Urin half. Now the problem when you have this split in society, and we're seeing this in our society today that is more divisively split than ever, is that without some sort of mechanism to reintegrate those halves in a natural and systematic way, you're going to have societal collapse. And the person who was seen as the mediator between these two halves was the ruler. The ruler mediated between Anan and Urin. The ruler mediated between the celestial realm and the earthly realm. The ruler mediated between the earthly realm and the lower world as well. And so we get references to this in their artwork. And metallurgy has a long history in South America stretching back to 1800 BC. And it actually parallels metallurgy in Europe up until, well, when Europe's, I think they lag behind the development of bronze by a few hundred years, and copper and gold alloys were quite important at the time. And so we see a lot of gold objects. Some other Moche objects that I have over here, these are ear spools that a ruler would wear. My favorite ear spool in the world, this little dude down here that is a Moche lord. You can see this over here. This is one of his prisoners with the prisoner collar. And these were found in the tomb, and this was the Lord of Sipan, along with these symbols of the natural world, because it is the act of naturalizing these artificial structures in society that ideology plays a role. And ideology is important too, what Roland Barthes referred to years ago as the mythologies of ideology. And so casting an inherently artificial sort of system of nobility versus commoner and of ultimate authority versus forced obeisance, you need to make people think, yeah, this is just the natural order of things. Don't pay attention to the guy behind the screen. And the Inca did this as well. And the Inca, who were notoriously ambivalent about representational imagery, they preferred abstraction, and they preferred actually architecture to a lot of the what we would consider more visual aspects of the artistic spectrum, would even design their buildings to look as if these man-made structures were part of the natural environment, and they have a central organic quality to them. Here I'm showing you the Torreon at Machu Picchu, and you can see the live rock that has been cut into little steps that lead to nowhere. And you can see these ashlars that were placed in this little natural crevice over here that look as if someone had a little pitcher of stonework and they were pouring it down to fill in this gap. And we see this, this activity over and over again in Andean Mesoamerica, the attempt to cast things that are artificial, like office holders. Here, these are officials in the Moche administrative hierarchy. These are fox messengers, or fox warriors, they're sometimes called. And here's our fox messenger pot from Mia that's right over here. It's not that the fox was particular, well, there was some particular significance. But again, in casting these official roles as being analogous to aspects of nature, you wind up with some pretty potent statements. A couple of vessels here. These two, well, this one is from the Peabody at Harvard, and two that I think are at the Met, that show another sort of more sinister aspect of this, and oftentimes in South America we'll see the natural world, birds and plants and other things that are depicted on pots, like this sort of simple scene here with these ibis-like birds on it. This is actually another statement of authority. This is a representation, a very modified and minimalized representation of a prisoner who's wearing a prisoner collar, and you can see on this pot over here where the head is still in place, that prisoner collar hanging down. And the birds are pecking at the body of the vessel. This was a particularly gruesome type of execution that was carried out in the Moche region, where individuals were strapped to racks and their skin would be peeled down and they would be exposed to the elements, as is taking place in this little pot over here. I'm gonna run out of time. I have run out of time, I suppose. But I have a couple last things, because I had to get to the ear spools, man. I fronted it. I gotta come in and finish with it. Because we're seeing here at Chimú, that was a precursor state to the Inca, another one of these things. Yes, gold, important, but whatever. It's the symbolism on here that matters. And we see the Lord of Chimú, who's being carried on a litter here. He looks somewhat human, maybe a little supernatural, and he's being carried by a bunch of well-dressed monkeys, I think it says on the website here, which is absolutely correct. Humans are above animals. The ruler is Anan. These monkeys are Urin, and in that way, they're also kind of equivalent to the commoners out there. And so this is a sort of play on this idea. He's higher than them, they're lower than him. On his head up here is a symbol of authority that was quite common amongst Chimú and the later Inca. It's a rainbow. actually. And the rainbow was one of the royal symbols of the Inca, and you can still see it flying today on flags in Cuzco. My first time in Cuzco, I thought, wow, this is a very open and welcoming place. And somebody said, well, it is, but those are actually the Inca flag of the rainbow, and the colors are in a different order as well. But this rainbow became sort of this symbol of the celestial connection that the Inca had, this thing that appears in the sky, yet is connected to the earth, is something that was quite significant to the Inca. And I'll show you, to wrap things up, how this actually worked for the Inca. Because this is the famous Intihuatana, or the hitching post of the sun, at Machu Picchu. And it served as a type of dais upon which the ruler would stand. And so imagine the Sapa Inca, the actual Inca, standing on this little step right here that is actually carved out of the live stone. And when he's standing there, he symbolizes something that Carolyn Dean at UC Santa Cruz has referenced as the Inca marrying the earth, because as he stood on this, he was standing within the earth itself at this point. His torso rose above it, and his head was in the sky. And so it was a symbol of his ability to unite all three realms of existence: the interior, the surface, and the sky up above. And these types of things show up all over the place at Machu Picchu, especially sacred stones like these. Again, treating the built environment as an aspect of nature. There were sacred stones all over the place at Machu Picchu, and they were left in situ, and the buildings were built around them. And they served as wakas, or sacred objects, and there's nothing more artificial than a building. So it serves as kind of the antithesis to that artificiality, and you wind up with this maybe mean in between, where you have a little bit of each. And as I was throwing this talk together, I wanted to bring in another object here, and this is a photograph from 1954 that's in the Mia collection as well by Werner Bischoff. A black and white shot from inside of that stairway little room that I was just showing you. And to the right over here, just to talk about the almost unconscious aspect of mirroring the natural environment with the built environment, was this photograph that I snapped almost unthinkingly when we were walking around at Machu a little while back. And I was really interested in the peaked roofs that are on the dwellings that were there, because it doesn't really snow here. You have to wonder, why do you have these peaked roofs? And as I was walking away, I turned around and I looked. And what I saw was the distant mountain over here. And if you look at the angle of repose of this peak, and you look at the angle of repose of the roof lines over here, the reason that they're so peaked is to mirror the surrounding landscape and to again enforce this idea of the fact that this built environment, the grand symbol of the power of the Inca, who used architecture as an imperial weapon, was a natural thing, like the mountains, like the clouds, and like the living that one does every day. So I'll end there, and I'll say thank you to you all, Tlaxcamati, and answer any questions that you might have. Maybe I'll leave this slide up. I like this slide. I should, and one of the other things that I wanted to mention, and before I ran out of time, so I'll steal your question time for a second here, is over on the right over there is another feature at Machu Picchu, a site that was built as kind of a pleasure retreat for Pachacuti Inca, one of the early Incas. It is an example of how you can weaponize this belief in ancestors, because one of the things that the Inca would do when they moved into a territory, they conquered an Aiju, is they would make sure that they symbolized the conquest of the Aiju founder. And in this particular case, and of course, right as I was snapping this picture, a bank of clouds literally rolled over the top of the distant mountain over here. But this stone, that is a almost completely unaltered natural stone from the site, mirrors almost exactly the distant peaks out there. And it is quite likely that that distant peak served as an Aiju founder. It was probably an Apu Aiju or a mountain Aiju. And by mirroring it and containing it, you control it. And so it's sort of conquest by visual in this particular sense. And we see this a lot in Inca stuff, where windows frame distant sites or they frame views of cities. And it is the framing it of the architecture that symbolizes the conquest of the polity. All right, that's my, I'll steal that. I don't know if anyone has any other questions for me, but go ahead and shoot. Sure.
On the calendar where it's every 52 years, how long, what was the lifespan of a person that they would hit that 52-year mark?
Yeah. In ancient Mesoamerica, it was a little bit like medieval Europe, where if you make it out of your first few years, you have a pretty good chance of living to seniority out there. 52 years, if you could hit 52 years, you were doing pretty good. Quite a few people lived long past that. And the benefit, at least in Aztec society, was that a lot of the laws and restriction governing conduct in public were removed from you once you reached the age of seniority, which was a little bit older than 52. But all the regulations would be off. You could drink in the morning when you woke up. Appearing in public drunk was a capital offense in Tenochtitlan. So to give people free rein to go out and hit the pulque first thing in the morning, they could participate in just about anything they wanted to participate in. And it was an aspect of sort of giving comfort to those in their years towards the end of their life. I could also talk about sacrificial rituals in there. They're both fine. That's my daughter on the right, and it's my colleague at Texas Christian. We both toured this site together a number of years back, and that's their son. I think this is after they got chased off of the Great Plaza for playing catch. They brought their baseball mitts and a baseball out there. We were trying to show that, yes, the Inca did have the ball game as well as Mesoamericans, but no one was buying it. They actually didn't have a great sense of humor about it.
They weren't 52 yet.
What's that?
They weren't 52 yet.
No, you can't do it when you're that young.
Well, if no one would venture a question, I have one. So since you showed us that beautiful Olmec mask, which is one of my favorite pieces in this collection, I wonder about the use of those masks.
There's some debate in that. One of the things I did get, I looked down at my watch and saw I was going painfully over time, was that the figure that's being held here in the arms of this individual, who has tattoos on his body that reference avian supernaturals and that reference earthly and underworld supernaturals down below. And he holds in his arms the center, and this is something that Carl Taube at UC Riverside has been arguing for years as kind of an early version of the maize god that's so important in the later art of the Maya. And he's wearing a mask. It's a little child who is wearing a mask. And again, it is this principle of rebirth and renewal that's being celebrated here. These masks are very specific. We refer to them as were-jaguar masks because they're partially human and partially feline. We also felt that werewolves were getting a little bit too much press. So the were-jaguars are now on the scene. The mask that we have here was probably used for a sacred bundle of some sort. We know that with later Teotihuacan and with the Aztecs, oftentimes relics associated with deceased important people, like rulers or great and powerful people, would be placed into sacred bundles and venerated from time to time, taken out on occasion on display. We know that at Teotihuacan, that great sort of metropolis, 250,000 people living in apartment compounds made out of concrete and plaster around 250 AD in central Mexico, that there are, in a city of 250,000 people, there's only a couple of monumental sculptures there. There's definitely some monumental buildings, but most of the imagery shows people venerating these kind of cult bundles that are wearing masks and headdresses. So this probably adorned the face of a bundle that may have once sat on top of this, and I didn't say what this is over here. This is an Olmec tabletop altar, and this one was in the process of being recarved, recycled, because after its lifetime and its use, it would be recarved into a colossal head. And you really can't say important person much more than having a 4-ton head made out of andesitic basalt out there. But the central figure is one of these lineage founders, and who is holding one of these infants as he emerges from this cave, as he emerges from the underworld, bringing renewal and new life out there. So it may have been, and we think that rulers, or these sort of priests, shamans that seem to be the head people in Olmec society, once sat on top of these, and perhaps their sacred bundles were displayed on top of them as well, or one of these masks was probably used. But I have gone over time.
I have an easy question.
Sure.
Back to the mask, please.
You think it's easy.
Back to the mask. The other object was tattooed. Was that scarification on the mask?
Yes.
Thanks.
It's probably scarification or tattoos of some sort that were on there. And the identifications of these that are on here were done by Michael Coe at Harvard a number of years ago. He sort of cracked the code of Olmec iconography as well as cracking the code of Maya hieroglyphs. And what we see on the face of the Neolin is a simplified version of what's oftentimes referred to as the Olmec supernatural. It's vaguely related to this little fellow over here. And then on his mouth, you see this X with little dots on every side. That is a reference to that principle with the 4 corners of the earth and a central place in the middle radiating out from that. And in this particular case, it's radiating out from his mouth, that I like quite a bit, because for the Aztecs, they referred to their rulers as the Huitzotl, or the great speaker. And so this idea that you're speaking with the voice of authority might have its foundations as far back as 1800 BC, when these things were being